Those of you who were able to be here and see the film on the influence of the autobiography of a yogi have already had a chance to see what an enormous impact this book has on the world. We're talking about it this year throughout the world because it's the 70th anniversary of its publishing in 1946. And from that time on, this simple book has become a kind of a force of nature where it has had the power to bring a whole new consciousness into the world. You know, when Yoganandaji came to America as a young man in 1920, he had a huge mission and a huge impact on America that began to spread around the world. But in the early years, he was primarily focused on giving talks. And so he would, even though at that time he was the most popular speaker in the entire country, he spoke to tens of thousands of people. Many lectures would have 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people attend and still have, even though it was in the largest halls in the country, Carnegie Hall in New York, for instance, still every seat would be taken and there would be people around many blocks trying to get in. So tremendous popularity, but that energy went out, and a talk is a little bit like riding on water. You give the talk. At the end of the talk, people feel uplifted, maybe even feel changed, but a week later, they barely remember what the words were, what was said, how they felt. So Master also realized that he had to do writing. And so he published actually many books, and of course his lectures have now been published in the form of books. But all that time, he was working on this great magnus opus of his, the Autobiography of a Yogi. When he came back to India in 1936, in part it was at the behest of his guru, Sri Yukteswar. He knew that the time was coming, Sri Yukteswar knew that the time was coming toward the end of his incarnation, and he called his great disciple, Yoganandaji, back to him at that time. But during that year that Yoganandaji spent in India, he was also going around and interviewing people that he had met, that he had talked with, that he had shared a life with, in order to gather the stories and in order to make sure that the stories that he maybe had heard second or third hand were correct, so that when he put out the Autobiography of a Yogi, he put it out in such a way that every word in there resonated with truth. And that truth that was present in that book had a power to change the consciousness of the person who read it, to change the consciousness of a whole country, because once that book was released in America, people started reading it. And as it said in this film that we have produced about the influence of the Autobiography of a Yogi, we talked with a person who it was their job to write a book on the influence of the Vedic teachings into the West, a book called American Veda. And during that time, they interviewed dozens and dozens of teachers in America and in Europe who had incorporated, many of them were not Vedic scholars, were not really even religious teachers. They were more, one could say, New Thought teachers. People like Wayne Dyer, who became very popular, and many others. But every one of those people, when asked what book influenced you, what book got you started on the spiritual path, the vast majority of those people said it was the Autobiography of a Yogi. And so that book not only was read by these people, but they in turn passed it on to others. We have a friend who always travels with 4 or 5 copies of the Autobiography of a Yogi. Because if he's in an airport and he gets into a conversation with someone and he realizes this person is looking for some answers in their life, he reaches in his satchel and he pulls out an Autobiography of a Yogi in order to pass that knowledge on. And he personally has distributed several hundred copies of that book. That book has influenced presidents, as it showed there. It's influenced very popular, iconic figures. It influenced George Harrison of the Beatles. George Harrison said at one point, the Autobiography of a Yogi saved my life because of the kind of fame and all that it brings with it, fame and money and a lifestyle of drugs and alcohol. Then he found the Autobiography of a Yogi, and it saved his life. As it said in this film, Steve Jobs, once he read that book, he read it every year for the rest of his life. So great influential people in the stream of consciousness of the West. But in spite of the fact that it has touched so many people, and the estimates, it's hard to know how many people have read it. Probably at least 10 million copies have been sold, but people pass that book on, and it goes on and on and on. So one person having it may pass it on to another and another and another. Many, many of my friends have asked people who were close to them, have you read the Autobiography of a Yogi? Oh, here, take my copy. I myself, this is an important time for me in one sense, because it was probably around exactly 50 years ago that I first read the Autobiography of a Yogi. It was in the fall, I don't remember the exact date, but I do remember the time. It was in the fall of 1966. So it was around, it could be that I started this book 50 years ago on this date. This could be my anniversary of having read that. I was looking for truth. I can't say I was looking for spirituality. I, at that time, would have described myself as being an agnostic, not knowing whether God existed or not. But I knew that something more, something vaster existed than what I had been exposed to. I had studied psychology in college. When I was a high school student, my thesis was on the meaning of dreams, why we dream. I was always interested in consciousness, but I could not find anything that satisfied some inner intuition that said our mind, our consciousness is much more vast, much greater than what I am experiencing at this time. I knew it intuitively, and I was searching for it in the only way I knew how to search, through science. I grew up in a little town in Minnesota, and yoga was not known in this little town. In fact, the town was the center of where they produced the meat product Spam that has now become famous for being junk for the mind. And so from that little town, the Autobiography of a Yogi was not known among those people. When I came after college, I moved immediately to San Francisco. In San Francisco in the mid-60s, was a very open, very experimental place. It was the era of the hippies. I wasn't exactly a hippie, but I was certainly a searcher. And so during that period of time, I came upon the Autobiography of a Yogi. And that book absolutely changed my life. Up until that time, I didn't know where to look to see what human potential was about, human consciousness was about. And here I read a book that was so filled with truth. There were many, many things in that book that were beyond my personal experience. In fact, let's face it, most of that book was beyond my personal experience. It was filled with miracles. I would not, a year before reading that book, if somebody had told me, I want to give you a book that's filled with miracles, stories of saints, I'd have said, I'm not interested. All that stuff, it doesn't really exist. But when I read that book, there was a vibration, there was some kind of a certainty that came from Yogananda. And that vibration that was there made me doubt myself before I could doubt Yogananda. And so the thought that I came into beginning to read that book with, that miracles don't exist, saints, those are fictional accounts from the Bible, from other writings. Yes, maybe there are great yogis somewhere up in the Himalayas, but they don't really relate to this world. All of that was changed upon the reading of that book. I've described it as feeling like, you know when you have a sweater that's all knit and there's a loose thread in that knitting, and you think, oh, I'm going to just pull that thread out and snap it off, and you pull it and it begins to unravel the knitting. That book began to unravel my whole conditioned mindset. And by the time I finished, I think I felt like someone who was standing there in their bare skin, because it so changed the limitations of the life that I had had up until that time. And it gave me a whole new paradigm, the vastness of consciousness that was not only possible, but was for every person, was their destiny. Every one of us is destined to experience the states of consciousness that Yogananda wrote about in that book. In one of the chapters, it's called a vision and an experience in cosmic consciousness. It's when he first experiences, at a very young age, he's only 17 years old, when he meets his great guru, Sri Yukteswar. And very shortly after that, Sri Yukteswar calls Yogananda out from Yogananda is meditating, and Sri Yukteswar says, his name at the time was Mukunda. He says, Mukunda, come here. And Mukunda, being a 17-year-old, we all know what it's like being a 17-year-old. Mukunda says, I'm meditating. And Sri Yukteswar says, Mukunda, come here. And he says, I'm meditating, Master. And Master says, I know how you're meditating, with thoughts like leaves blowing in the wind. Mukunda, come here. Well, being exposed like that, what choice did he have? So Mukunda comes down, and Sri Yukteswar says, poor boy, mountains won't give you what you're looking for. And he takes him out on a balcony, and he taps him over the heart, and the breath is withdrawn from Yogananda. And then his consciousness begins to expand. And he sees not just forward, as we do with our two eyes, but he sees in 360 degrees. And he sees through obstacles like the brick wall that is in front of the property. And he sees the sap flowing in the veins of the trees. And he sees cows passing behind apparently solid objects. And he experiences at that time a state of consciousness that he says is for each of us our destiny. And so the experience of that state of consciousness where it isn't really his mind, we're beyond the mind. So where the consciousness expands and it expands and expands until there is not the perception, not the intellectual thought that I'm one with everything, but the experience of being one with everything. Now that was what I was after. That is what was intuitively driving me all the way from time I was a young man trying to study dreams, trying to get some handle on what is the scope of consciousness. And it's not just me, it's thousands and thousands and millions of people whose lives have been changed by that great book. I've met hundreds of people that I've talked with who say reading that book was the most important step on the spiritual path of my whole life, or the most important experience. The book comes, in many cases, kind of magically to people. I've talked with people who said they don't know how it got there. They had an apartment, they came in, the door was locked, they came in, and there was the book on their coffee table. They don't know how it even got there. I talked with one young man who said that he had heard about this book, somebody had recommended it, so he looked at it, and he didn't like the picture on the cover. I've talked with others who said that looking at that picture alone changed their life, but not for this man. He said he didn't like the picture, and he didn't want to read any book that had a picture like that on its cover. Some weeks or months later, he was helping someone move, and there was a big box of books, and he took it down off of a shelf, and there was a book there on the top of it that didn't have any cover on it. And so he opened it up and he started reading, and he was fascinated by what he was reading. And so he read it more and more and more, and then he took it away because this was just an old box of old books. And then he read it, and then finally he got to the page where there were pictures, and he saw what it was, and he realized that was the book that I had rejected. So here, when Yogananda wants to change a life, he's quite capable of ripping the cover off of a book, if that's what you need. And so hundreds and hundreds of people have had that book change their life. And so the influence of that book has gone on and changed the mindset, as I said, of virtually all the spiritual teachers, the New Age teachers in the Western world. Yogananda was the true ambassador of India to the world. I would say that from the time that he came until probably Mahatma Gandhi, if someone in America had said, "Do you know of anyone of Indian nationality?" they would say, "I've heard of Yogananda." He was the representative of this great nation to the West. But more than that, much, much more than being a cultural ambassador, he was an ambassador of the Spirit. Because India is now and has long been the guru for the world. This is the birth point of great saints of great consciousness. and the great saviors of the world have virtually all either been born here or have come here as Jesus did and studied for many, many years of his life. But India is the birthplace of higher consciousness. And so that's what Yoganandaji was bringing. And when he wrote the Autobiography of a Yogi, that book went out like a carrier wave of higher consciousness. And so, yes, the content is wonderful. You know, I was looking this morning, and at least a third of the chapters in that book are about saints. I would say almost every chapter has some miracle in it. Now, when I was first, as I said, when I was growing up, I had rejected miracles. But Yogananda didn't just talk about, oh, somebody could manifest themselves in a field. It had either happened to him or happened to someone like his parents. And so the miracles that he talked about, he wasn't talking second or third or fourth hand. I read about this. Therefore, he was talking about his own experience. And that vibration of truth that was in that book made me and made millions of others say, I cannot doubt the veracity of what is written in these pages. Therefore, if I can't doubt this, what do I doubt? I have to doubt my own limitations, my own thought that the world contains this much but no more. You know, we're locked in, all of us, to the thought that what we see with our senses, what we are able to hear through our ears, that's the limitation of the world. Swami Kriyananda told about a man who was, I think, the minister of agriculture in America, and he and a friend were riding on a train, and they looked out and there was a flock of sheep. And this friend said, oh, look, those sheep have just been sheared. And this minister, who was very fixed, looked out and said, well, on this side anyway. He wouldn't even accept the fact that seeing a flock of sheep that had been sheared, that they, on the other side of their body, it was also true. So it's just that we have a very limited sense of what reality is. We have a limited sense. And then when you read a chapter like an experience in cosmic consciousness, or you read the poem Samadhi, or you read story after story after story of someone levitating, of someone materializing another body, of someone materializing a whole golden palace, of someone healing people over and over and over, those stories begin to change your consciousness. But honestly, it's not just the stories. It's not just the content. It's not just the words. There is a power in that book to change consciousness. When Swami Kriyananda first went to Yogananda, he said how that book had changed his life. And Yogananda's response was, that's because I put my vibrations into it. Swami Kriyananda didn't even know, and had never heard the word vibrations used in that way. But there is a power, a subtle power, that is behind the words. It's as if each copy of that book is a carrier wave for a state of consciousness that our souls recognize. Because what Yogananda is talking about is the journey of our own soul, the journey of our own consciousness, and we on some level recognize the veracity of that. And it's beyond the written word, it's beyond the pictures, it's beyond anything. But once that book goes into the heart and the mind, and especially the soul of an individual, that individual is changed and they're never the same again. And I know that that was true for me, and the 50 years that have ensued after I read that book have been catalyzed by that book and then led, guided by the vibration and by the teachings that it contains.
Good morning, everyone. In 1893, a young child was born, a little boy born to a Bengali family, and his parents gave him the name Mukunda. And Mukunda showed remarkable spirituality from infancy. But when he reached adolescence, as Jyotish was saying, he found his guru, Sri Yukteswar, in a miraculous way. And he took training. And Sri Yukteswar was not an easy guru to follow. As Master said in his autobiography, for every tooth he loosened in my metaphorical jaw, loosening my ego, I am grateful beyond facility of expression. And so Sri Yukteswar trained him with very strict principles, very strict standards. But then Yogananda had reached a stage when he wanted to enter the Swami order. Mukunda entered the stage where he wanted to enter the Swami order. And the name he chose, the name we know him as, Yogananda, meaning bliss through yoga, bliss through union, bliss through union with God. And if one could simplify and what Yogananda's mission was, what he came to share, it was a vision of unity on many levels, and we'll touch on them. And all of this vision of all these different aspects of unity make up the autobiography of a yogi. It was a unity of vision in terms of an infinite God beyond creation and a personal God that dwells in the human heart and hears our prayers and knows our suffering. It was a vision of unity with regard to the most recent breakthroughs in modern science and the most ancient teachings of religion. It was a vision of unity between East and West, between all religions, all cultures, all backgrounds. And it was a vision of unity of the soul with all of creation. And he shared that vision in autobiography, but he also gave us the tools and the techniques, the path of Kriya Yoga that helps us also to achieve that vision of unity, to live in that state where we are no longer at cross purposes with our higher self. We no longer see the world in terms of us and them, this nation, that nation, but we live in a state because of our awakened awareness of God through the practice of Kriya Yoga. We too can live in that vision of unity. Once a skeptical person came to Yogananda in America and said, how can you say that God is infinite? He is in the farthest reaches of space. How could he possibly care about you and me, about my problems, his problems? How could he possibly hear our prayers if he is infinite? And Yogananda's answer was so a brilliant response and very satisfying to the heart. He said to the skeptical scientist, he said, your vision, your understanding of your understanding of infinity is too small. God is infinitely large. Indeed, this is true. But God is also infinitely small. And so he resides in the heart of every person, every creature, every flower, every atom. And so he doesn't have to listen to us, to hear our prayers, to know of our suffering. He is already there in our hearts, and he knows what we need before we even ask. And Jyotish referred to the beautiful chapter in Experience in Cosmic Consciousness. And in that chapter, and I will take an aside here, for all of you who are coming for the first time, we are gifting you with a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi, because we want to share the power and blessing and beauty of this book with you. But in the poem, there is in the chapter in Experience in Cosmic Consciousness, the beautiful poem, I believe unique in all of spiritual literature, simply called Samadhi, where Master describes in the language of poetry his experience of that state. And there's a passage in it where he says, he's describing it, and he says, not a mental chloroform or unconscious state without willful return. Samadhi extends the limits of my conscious realm, extends the limits of my conscious realm beyond the borders of my mortal frame, to the farthest boundary of eternity, where I, the cosmic sea, watch the little ego floating in me, the sparrow, each grain of sand falls not without my sight. And so Yogananda's book tells, yes, miracles, but stories of answered prayers, that God was there knowing what we needed. He doesn't answer all prayers, but prayers that will bring us to our own spiritual evolution. Those prayers are answered, and God is watching the sparrow that might fall, watching the least grain of sand. So in that vision of unity, of the infinite and the personal, he brought them together, and it gives us the faith to pray, believing, knowing that God is listening, and he knows our needs, and he will answer them with love and wisdom. The vision of unity we mentioned of science and religion. Historically in the past, religion and science were not separated. But over time, particularly in this 19th and 21st century, scientists began to move away from God. He couldn't be found in their test tubes. So it was something that was ignored. But in an Autobiography of a Yogi, there is reference after reference to great scientists of East and West, and how true scientists not only can discern the natural laws of the universe, but they see a divine hand behind it all. And in the chapter, The Law of Miracles, What a wonderful chapter title, The Law of Miracles. Master brings forth the discoveries of the most brilliant physicist of our time, of Einstein and others, and he shows that what Einstein was saying is merely a reverberation of what the great Vedas have said all along, that this world is not what it seems, that our senses do not describe reality, that there is a subtler reality beyond even the atomic structure, and that the only constant that Einstein used in his great mathematical formulas was the speed of light. Light is the only constant. And this is what all the great scriptures tell us. Behind this world of Maya, of duality, of shadow and light, there is a greater light. And that is the light of the consciousness of God. And this is what all the great scientists come to realize, that all of the world, yes, it is a play of light and shadows, but beyond that, there is only light. Yogananda tells a story in Autobiography that during the First World War, he went to a movie house to see a newsreel about World War I that was being waged with tremendous suffering on the battlefields of Europe. And he sat there, being a man of God, a man of tremendous compassion to the sufferings of others. And he prayed, "Lord, why do you allow such suffering?" And he said, a gentle voice responded, "Look more deeply." And he realized, first he saw, not as a newsreel, but he saw as though he were on that battlefield, and the suffering was much greater than what was portrayed in the film. And he prayed, "Lord, help me understand this." And then he said he had a unique experience where he saw behind the suffering, behind the pain, only the light of God. And it was so reassuring, because we in our lives can get hypnotized into believing that, oh, this terrible thing is happening, that might happen, will we be safe, will this war come, will this politician be elected? Behind it all is the vision of unity, that there is only the light of God. And Yogananda describes this in many, many different ways. The vision of unity of East and West. He came to us in the West, and we are eternally grateful for what he brought. And we come back now to his homeland, because he couldn't spend his life here. And we share the great teachings and the great work that he wrote. And he wrote commentaries on all the world's great religions, on the Bhagavad Gita, on the Bible, on the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a great Sufi mystic. And he wanted to show the same truth underlies it all, the unity of all religions, all cultures. And finally, the unity of all life. And this is what he lived. He came like a warrior of light, and he dispelled the darkness. And he stood and he told people, God is real. And in my pages of Autobiography of a Yogi, you will see his loving hand, his presence behind everything. I read recently that a good book does not reveal all its secrets on the first reading. And a great book does not reveal all its secrets on many readings. And a divine book, such as Autobiography of a Yogi, takes many, many lifetimes. and many, many readings to probe its depths. I have read it many times, and every time I read it, it is a different book. Not entirely, but in subtle ways, because the book is like a mirror. If you approach it with restless energy, oh, let me get to the next chapter, if your mind is distracted, if you have doubts, preoccupations, then the book doesn't reveal itself to you. But if you see the book as the living expression of an avatar that can speak to you, if the heart is calm and open, receptive, devoted, then it's like a beautiful diamond. However you turn it in the light, it reflects a new radiance. And so, my friends, it is such an honor to share with you the power and beauty of this book. It is more than a book. It is a living presence of God, gifted to us in this age, in the time of great moral confusion, ethical confusion, spiritual confusion. It is gifted to us now to show us the way and to be a guide for our lives, and step by step to take us to the experience that Yogananda promised, that for those who faithfully follow these teachings, they will find God. We will find God, faithfully drawing from these great vibrations. And I would like to close now by inviting you to join me in a prayer of Yogananda's. Earlier this year, some friends of ours who are Vedic astrologers told us this will be a very difficult year in the world because of the planetary configuration. There will be a lot of hostility, conflict, violence, and this will subside towards the end of the year. But hearing this, we decided that we should take action, and we began a global campaign for people to practice Yogananda's prayer for world peace and harmony. And as of September 21st, which was International World Peace Day, we reached our goal. We were hoping to reach it by the end of the year, but we reached it on that day of 1 million prayers for world peace. And we are continuing till the end of this year. And these are prayers from all over the world, every continent, not Antarctica or Arctica, but every other continent. We have a little tracker that shows from our app where these prayers are being offered. So I would like to invite you to join me now in this prayer so that we don't only receive the blessings of this great master, but we serve as his channels as well. So please stand. And it's a very simple prayer. We will repeat 10 times in unison. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. And then, again in unison, we repeat, Lord, fill me with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. So let's feel the blessings of God uniting us in the vision of unity that Yogananda brought. And let us pray together. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. And now, Lord, fill me with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill me with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill me with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. And let's chant Om and send these prayers with Yogananda's blessings and vibration out into the world. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Thank you very much for reminding us about the legacy of Paramahansa Yogananda, for